BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, planning?
Both good infrastructure and thriving nature are really important to people. And to sacrifice that just to focus on speed is ultimately a false economy.
Ports?
I think many people don't knowingly break the rules, they do it in ignorance. It's about coaching people, I think, rather than catching them.
And primitive sheep.
There are a list of breeds which came over from primitive times, by which I mean Vikings, Romans, Celts. They tend to look less like your stereotypical white fluffy sheep.
More on all that later. First, all this week on our sister programme, Farming Today, we've been looking at agroforestry. Farming Today, as I really hope you know, goes out here on BBC Radio 4 at 5:45 every weekday morning, or it's available whenever you fancy on BBC Sounds. Now, in simple terms, agroforestry means putting farming and forestry into the same field, with the aim of improving soil and biodiversity, as well as growing food. The term encompasses a wide range of approaches, from growing arable crops to grazing livestock, all alongside trees. I spoke to Professor of Sustainable Agriculture and Agroforestry, Paul Burgess, from Cranfield University, who explained what these different systems entail.
A simple definition is farming with trees. So it includes traditional systems like parklands, wood pastures, grazed orchards. If we bring together crops and trees, we sometimes call that silvo-arable agroforestry. And if we bring together trees and livestock, we sometimes call that silvopastoral systems.
So it can be as simple as having more trees on your farm and using them to shelter animals, for instance, or as complicated as planting rows of fruit trees in an arable field so that you combine both growing the arable crop and the fruit trees.
It encompasses a wide range of systems, and it requires a sort of new way of thinking. I guess when I did an agricultural degree, we never talked about trees, but increasingly sensible farm management requires the sensible integration of trees within the farm business.
Why might it be a good idea?
Firstly, the products that they can provide, so be it fruit, nuts, timber, wood products, biochar. Secondly, the enhancement of your existing enterprises, be it shelter and shade for livestock, welfare benefits, minimising wind erosion. Thirdly, I think the carbon benefits are critical. It's easy to demonstrate the carbon stored within a tree. Fourthly, the cultural benefits, the landscape, the recreational, the biodiversity benefits.
How much do you think the growing popularity is down to the fact that this could be included as an option under the sustainable farming incentive, so you could get public money to help you do this?
For most farmers, managing trees on farms isn't something that's obvious. So availability of training and resources and the ability to see what has been done in other situations is particularly helpful.
What do you think will be the impact of the uncertainty over the future of the SFI on uptake?
So my understanding is that DEFRA will sort of give an update over the summer. My understanding is that there is still grants available for you to help develop an agroforestry plan. But I think in terms of long-term planning, the reasons for developing agroforestry need to be sort of separate from the grant arrangement at any particular time. For instance, the need to sort of move towards net zero. I think that's a key sort of platform on which you can develop an argument for integrating trees more on a farm. And if there are grants available, then that's great. But I wouldn't base a decision to go forward with agroforestry on the grants alone.
Professor Paul Burgess from Cranfield University there. Well, one farm where agroforestry has been developed over 2 decades is Stephen Briggs' Tennant Farm in North Cambridgeshire. He's a farmer and soil scientist and now grows organic cereals between rows of organic apple trees. He's also the first person who explained agroforestry to me many, many years ago now, and he's spent a lot of time helping farmers and others understand it. Anna Hill's been to meet him.
We're standing in quite a unique landscape here, really, because we have the fertile, flat fenland in front of us with a crop on, which is a cereal crop. But we also have avenues of apple trees.
What you're looking at is rows of fruit trees with a 24-metre alley in between, which allows us to run a controlled traffic farming system up and down between the lines of fruit trees.
How much difference does it make having the trees there?
As farmers, our principal single resource is sunlight. So as a cereal farmer, when that cereal starts to go golden in the middle of the year, actually we've turned the solar panels off. We're not harvesting that resource. So what we've done here is we've layered both in time and three-dimensionally above and below the ground. We've layered a perennial, in this case a fruit tree, and an annual crop together in the same land area. So we've actually made the farm bigger, but in a three-dimensional way to harvest sunlight throughout the year and keep those solar panels turned on.
But you're also working underground as well. You have the roots of the trees coming out into the field. Does it help with the nutrients in the soil?
The first thing we do is annually we prune the canopy of the fruit trees, but also we prune the roots with a root pruner to manage those roots so that we're not getting competition for the same resources in the same area of the soil. As we look down the alleys here, we were expecting to have normal crop production through the middle of the alley, and then it sort of drop off on the edges as it gets toward the shoulder. We're actually seeing the reverse to that. So we're getting better crop production immediately adjacent to the tree edges, 8 to 10 metres out. And that's partly in the winter we're getting better drainage from the deeper tree roots. And in the summer, of course, we've created a windbreak and a microclimate, so we're getting water conservation and below ground mycorrhizal beneficial fungi, giving better nutrient cycling, better water capture, better phosphate, nitrogen cycling, etc. So we're seeing a yield lift on the edges, so much so that when I drive the combine harvester, I have to tilt the table on the combine to account for that difference in crop productivity.
Stephen Briggs. Well, from trees with crops to trees with livestock. Silvopasture is another agroforestry system which, as the name suggests, combines trees, livestock grazing and pasture management. Our reporter Marie-Claire Carey-Jones has been to meet Tom Clare and Jackie Banks at their farm in North Pembrokeshire, where they use a native breed of sheep in their agroforestry system.
Come on in and meet the sheep. So these are badger-faced Todwen sheep.
And they're browsing there on some cut-down branches?
Yeah, so this is a bit of willow that we've given them this morning. It's not much leaf yet, but they take the bark. You're not trying to feed them the bulk of their diet. Just a little bit of it helps them with their general health. This is Penkedney. We're developing here a silvopasture system.
We got it about 10 years ago, and since then we've been rotationally grazing and planting trees in each of the cells we graze in.
How difficult has it been for you working out what works best here?
Well, lots of trial and error, putting in a lot more than we intend to keep, which is something you can do more with your native broadleaves than your £40 a pop walnut.
And with the walnuts, has it been difficult trialling those here?
So far I've not been disappointed. Plan A is to sell the nuts bagged in shell, I think. Plan B is to run pigs under the trees.
Why would you need the plan B?
In case, when it comes down to it, selling walnuts isn't paying as it should. So what we've done is we've planted a tree in a cactus guard here, which is a sort of spiky cylinder. But what I've done is I've planted a gorse at the bottom of the tree there. And the idea is that the gorse will grow up around the stem of the tree, and then I'll take the cactus guard off, because the gorse will then be protecting the tree from bark nibbling. And then when the tree develops its adult bark, I'll cut the gorse to the ground.
That seems a lot more intensive than if you were just planting a tree in a field with no livestock.
Well, yeah, I mean, the sheep want to eat what's in that cage. That's food to them, and that's exactly why I'm planting it here. I just need to get it up and above the browse line.
So you've got to put lots of protection around them to stop the sheep nibbling them. But actually the sheep are sort of doing a job for the trees as well, in that they're grazing right up sort of around the trees, which is preventing brambles and weeds competing with that tree, so that tree establishes really well.
And what about the challenges?
One of the challenges has actually been dry springs here. So in terms of a tree establishment, it's sort of counterintuitive. We're in wet West Wales, but actually, those dry springs are one of the things that have caused us the biggest problem. And like this current stretch of dry weather, we're out watering things that we planted over winter, which just, that's a lot of work.
This is our orchard. It's mostly apples, dessert apples. And there's some pears, some damsons, and there's some chestnuts. A grazed orchard was what we went for here.
So for you, what are the big advantages of silver pasture here?
It being a very free draining and south facing slope, we want that shelter provided by the trees for our sheep, for our grass. The grass is consistently much greener under the trees. There's something for the sheep to have a nibble on, there's something for them to scratch on. There's the rainwater infiltration, helping rain into the landscape instead of sheeting off into the nearest river. For us, the ecological integrity is what underpins our agricultural output.
Tom Clare there. Well, Tom and Jackie's badger-faced sheep are just one of an estimated 160 different native breeds of livestock here in the UK. That's across cattle, sheep, pigs, goats, equines and poultry. However, some are doing better than others. This week, the Rare Breeds Survival Trust published its latest watch list, an annual situation report for rare breeds. Whilst there is some good news for some, like the large white pig and Gloucester cattle, the watch list has highlighted others, such as the Manx Lockton and Leicester Longwool sheep, which are both in decline. The Trust wants the government to re-establish a ministerial native breeds roundtable and is calling for strategic and coordinated action on rare breeds. I spoke to RBST Chief Executive Christopher Price.
The Manx Lockton is a small, primitive, hardy sheep which, as the name suggests, originated from and is strongly associated with the Isle of Man. They've got a rather attractive reddish-brown fleece and normally a significant number of horns. There can be up to 6 of them, so they're quite spectacular when you see them. Leicester Longwool has a very long woolly fleece and dark blue ears. Its wool is known for having a spiral curl.
And why do you think these rare breeds are in trouble?
There will possibly be an element of people just choosing not to register their stock because it is expensive and times are hard. We're also talking about really quite small numbers, so it doesn't take much for a few farmers to change their approach to have a significant effect on percentages. But I think it's as likely or more likely to be a commercial matter. It's harder to find markets for primitive sheep products unless you know what you're doing.
What does primitive mean in this context?
There are a list of breeds which came over from primitive times, by which I mean Vikings, Romans, Celts. They tend to look less like your stereotypical white fluffy sheep. There are some very good farmers, particularly in the Lake District and the West Country, who are making money out of primitive sheep breeds by building a brand based on those primitive qualities and the attractive story they tell.
If we lose these breeds, what do we lose?
A variety of things, I think. They do have a niche economic role. Farmers are going to have to find new ways of running their businesses as we're having to compete more on global markets with the ongoing uncertainty about the future of government support. There is money to be made if you can work out your business properly. Secondly, they are part of our native biodiversity. And then there's what the native breeds add to the landscape and just sort of quality of life. Many of them are interesting to look at. They're exciting. They've got an attractive history. They often have a strong sense of place, being bred to work on particular landscapes and habitats at particular altitudes. All of those would be lost if we lost those breeds.
Now, you're calling for a ministerial native breeds round table, something that we have had in the past. How would that help?
Under the previous government, it was recognised that, we don't have a department within DEFRA that focuses on native breeds, but there are lots of bits within DEFRA that have an impact on native breeds. And what the then Minister, Mark Spencer, to his credit, did was pull together the relevant people with a view to pulling together an overall package that would help support the breeds. Sadly, the election was called before it was finished. I'd emphasise this isn't just about money or even about money. It's simply about DEFRA having a more focused and coordinated approach to something that could provide useful business opportunities for a certain sector of livestock farming in England.
Christopher Price there from the Rare Breed Survival Trust. The wildlife trusts have warned that a government amendment to its planning bill would be disastrous for both the natural world and big building projects. The Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which is currently going through Parliament, aims to streamline the planning system, making it easier for developers to speed up big building projects. However, as we've reported, many nature organisations are critical of it, saying in a letter to government that it's one-sided and throws environmental protections to the wind. Well, this week the government tabled an amendment to the bill, which it claims will slash a year of infrastructure delivery. The amendment removes statutory consultees from the pre-application process. Now, statutory consultees are organisations like the Environment Agency, Forestry Commission and Natural England, which advise on major infrastructure projects before they go into the planning system. The Wildlife Trust's Matt Brown says the amendment paves the way for a lose-lose-lose scenario for nature, communities and infrastructure delivery.
Well, at the moment, since 2008, there have been a list of consultees that when there's a major infrastructure development proposed, that the developers have to consult. And this is really important because it's effectively an early warning system for issues that might come up in the process. And those issues can range from issues that would affect development and make the infrastructure project more difficult to deliver, but also stuff that can affect nature. It's really concerning to see the proposals which would effectively strip out this expertise and this early warning system.
The government, though, is trying to speed things up. It says it wants to cut down the average 2-year statutory pre-consultation period by half, which would pave the way for new roads, railways and wind farms, they say, which will bolster the country's connectivity and energy security. And that's an understandable aim, isn't it?
It's an understandable aim, but the government has made the wrong diagnosis here. This has been in place since 2008, and if you look at the early years, actually, proposals moved through relatively quickly. What did happen after 2012 was really a decade of austerity, particularly with some of the statutory consultees, leading to real delays in some places where they would respond. The system works. It needs more capacity to deliver. Both good infrastructure and thriving nature are really important to people, and to sacrifice that just to focus on speed is ultimately a false economy. We need to get these things right, and this is a kind of panicked response that won't deliver for nature and it won't deliver for infrastructure either.
The government's argument, though, is that you can't have big projects delayed or made more expensive, and the example that's always quoted at moments like this is the HS2 Bat Tunnel. So this is a pragmatic way through.
This is not pragmatic at all. What's really important with these infrastructure proposals is that you have expertise in early. This is expertise from nature experts, but also from development experts and from local communities. And the famous Bat Tunnel, one of the major issues there was that they did not apply that expertise early enough. That led to a panicked response later on in the process and a botched, very expensive solution. Pre-application, the start of the process, that's where you get things right. That's where you nip problems in the bud. And it is really concerning that the government's proposals would strip out that expertise and early warning system, and it could lead to all sorts of problems later on.
I just want to quote something that the Deputy Prime Minister and the Housing Secretary Angela Rayner has said. She says, "We can't afford to have projects held up by tiresome requirements and uncertainty caused by a system that isn't working for communities or developers." And she describes this change as strengthening the bill.
This is not going to work for creating a level playing field for developers, and it's not going to work for protecting the green spaces and rich natural environment that people really want to see protected. So this big legislative change is going to cause more uncertainty, and that in itself could cause more delays.
Matt Brown, Head of Public Affairs at the Wildlife Trusts. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government told us the government's clear that removing these statutory requirements does not signify that pre-submission consultation and high-quality engagement is no longer important. They told us that statutory guidance will be introduced, which they say will set strong expectations around consultation. Now, as regular listeners to the programme will know, restrictions have been introduced on what visitors and returning holidaymakers can bring into the UK. This is in response to concerns about foot and mouth outbreaks in Europe. As of the 12th of April, meat and dairy products cannot be brought back from Europe into the country. The new rules cover everything from cured meats and cheeses to sandwiches, regardless of whether products are packaged or not, the aim being to prevent a foot and mouth outbreak here. Well, over the past couple of weeks, some of you have been in touch to say there hasn't been much publicity about this, and that at ports and airports you're not seeing any signs or any inspections. Peter Shorten emailed.
My son and his family were returning last Friday from Germany through the Channel Tunnel and had carefully consumed all meat and dairy products at risk of serious indigestion in the process. They were surprised that there was no signing warning that such products were not allowed, and even more staggered when they realised no check had been made on their arrival at the British end.
Farmer Becky Berry told us that,
having just come back from France, I was shocked that there was zero awareness of the no meat and dairy policy. No one asked about it at the border, and whilst there were the usual random checks being undertaken, there wasn't any mention of the changes. Therefore, can we assume that many people will still be bringing cheese and meats back into the country? With raclette on offer and the cold weather, my daughters were sorely tempted to bring a wedge back, and we were all mortified that there weren't any signs or indication at the border that we couldn't have.
I spoke to Anthony Baldock, the chairman of the Association of Port Health Authorities, who also sits on the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health's advisory panel on port health, and asked him who's responsible for alerting the public to these restrictions.
It's a matter that the Border Force people do, and that's because it's connected to customs controls. It used to be a shared function. At the present time, Port Health authorities are assisting Border Force colleagues, but it really is primarily their function at borders.
Is it working at the moment, do you think?
I think it's working in some places, and other places it needs protection. I think the whole move away from Europe has had an impact in showing where weak points are, and we certainly need to do more in those areas.
Now, the restrictions came in mid-April, but as we've heard, numerous listeners have been in touch with us saying they haven't seen any signs at ports. Why not?
I'm sure there are products there, whether they haven't been noticed, whether not prominent enough, but there certainly is always a space for more signage to go up in these kind of situations. I would think there's a very large digital campaign being run as well at the moment. That's certainly what happens in legally imported goods in the commercial sector.
People are also saying that they're worried that nobody's doing any inspections either. If nobody checks, can restrictions like this ever work?
Well, it's always better if we do more. Checks are happening, but obviously it's something that is a limited resource, so they always could do better, but checks will be happening and people will be profiled for certain kinds of checks. But it is a limited resource, of course. That's why I say there's probably a space to use environmental health staff who've got those skills to work alongside Border Force colleagues for the long term, rather than just for periods of time when funding is available.
Have those environmental health officers, though, got the time? Because we've talked before on this programme about the constraints on budgets. How much of what we're hearing from listeners is going to be down to money?
Well, that's very true, and investment does need to come, and that's where we do need more environmental health officers. You're quite right. Local government does have its own struggles with funding, but they are certainly a workforce that aren't utilised in that space well enough at the moment.
How confident are you, given where we are, that we can keep foot and mouth out this time?
There's always a risk with personal imports, but yeah, I think the focus is right. It's about educating the public. I think many people don't knowingly break the rules, they do it in ignorance. So it's very much about that campaign, and to say this is why we're being asked to do these things and get responsible behaviour in the public. It's about coaching people, I think, rather than catching them. That's the way we'll have most effect.
And what would you say to the listeners we've heard from who say they've been in various places coming back into the country with no signs, no inspections, and they're not feeling very confident about this?
I think that's something of great importance, and it really needs to be shared with people that are responsible for that policy. So that's obviously a matter of urgency, and that needs to be raised with Border Force colleagues.
Anthony Baldock there. We did ask to speak to the Border Force, but they told us to contact the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, which in a statement told us the government will do whatever it takes to protect British farmers from foot and mouth. We have strict import controls in place to manage the risk of disease, and they added, we're working closely with ports, airports and travel operators, ensuring that awareness of the new restrictions is raised, including via prominent signage. That's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Joe Pesey, and Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.